Egypt.
They came from Egypt. And then there was a book published around 50 AD called The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. It's very well known in the academic world. And it's basically a merchant's guide to the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. And it mentions the Ganges Delta again as being the place where you go to trade in raw silk from an inland city called Thena. So it was quite clear that Rome itself, of course, nearly bankrupted itself importing silk from China. As it was quite clear that one of the major destinations for their merchants was the Ganges Delta. Then if you started to look at the ancient maps that were drawn up by Greek cartographers like Ptolemy, you found the Ganges marked absolutely accurately, and the Brahmaputra being marked going up through the Himalayas and even turning towards Tibet. So that meant people who were giving Ptolemy the information must have traveled the Brahmaputra to know that. If you then looked at the international trade routes, you'd say, why would anyone walk 7,000 miles across Central Asia to go to China when they could sail around India, come to the Ganges Delta, up the Brahmaputra, across the Ledo Road, 500 kilometers or something, to the headwaters of the Yangtze, and then get down to the great cities of China? So it started to make sense, and that was my going-in point, and then starting to look for documentary, circumstantial, archaeological evidence to justify a theory.
So have you been able to justify yet? I mean,
absolutely. Professor Sufi Rahman of Jahangirnagar University, of course, has been famously digging at Varibatishwar
from Jahangirnagar University.
Yes, for 15 years. The material he's found is the kind of material that you would expect to find.
Is that in Varibatishwar?
Yes, that's right. From the Ganges Plains civilization, which of course famously was the Harappan migrating from the Indus because of climate change, and the Aryans migrating from Persia, meeting in the Ganges basin and developing what is actually the world's first industrial civilization. And the kind of materials that he's found in Vari, which is ironwork, bronze work, jewellery, ancient coinage, a sure sign of ancient trade right there in the Ganges Delta. Then you start exploring the Ganges Delta and you find the sunk city of Vikrampur. You find, just only last week, there was some initial work done in Kishoreganj, at the site that was excavated in 1935 by a British team at Igros which produced exactly the same sort of material as they've been finding at Vari. You look at Mahastangar, of course, which is just off the river system. So if you look at the course of the old Brahmaputra, and I admit when I started to look at this, I didn't realize the Brahmaputra used to go down and meet the Meghna. I thought of the Brahmaputra running down the Jamuna and joining the Ganges. So when you follow the course of the old Brahmaputra, you begin to see evidence of ancient trade centers. Very clear, and that's the archaeological evidence. They say you've got the cartographic, you've got the documentary evidence, you've got the evidence of people like Ibn Battuta, Ralph Fitch, the merchant who came in the 16th century, where interestingly even Shakespeare has a little reference to his trip.
Really?
Yes. In Macbeth, Act 1, Scene 3, the first witch says to Macbeth, her husband to Aleppo is gone, he's master of the Tiger. And the Tiger was the ship that Ralph Fitch sailed from London to Aleppo to start his journey that ended up. And his journal of visiting Shonagar, Barishal, the whole area around here, is fascinating in his description of the lifestyles.
Yeah.
So I was utterly amazed, and even more amazed one day to take down the original work of Robinson Crusoe, which everyone's read, and they all think of Man Friday on the Desert Island, and finding that actually Robinson Crusoe's first adventure was being shipwrecked in the North Sea. His last adventure was trading in opium and diamonds here. And very satisfied he was with the trade. So when Daniel Defoe was writing that novel in 1717, even before the East India Company had really established their presence here firmly, he knew that it was a rich centre of trade. So there were all kinds of evidence.
Evidence, and it's clearly demonstrated that...
And Adam Smith, in writing his Wealth of Nations, there's a chapter in which he castigates the East India Company for their behaviour in Bengal because it was one of the richest places in the world. So then you start looking at the wider archaeology. The archaeologists have totaled around 400 ruined Buddhist vihara. Now that's the greatest concentration of Buddhist vihara anywhere in the world. And I think we are able to say this was probably the cradle of Buddhism. Now, you don't develop that number of vihara and all that goes with it, all the monks and the hospitality and so on, if there wasn't a market.
So if I clearly understand that, you were saying that the Ganges Delta was a major center of international trade.
Yes.
And it also extended the line of trading centers along the rivers heading north.
Yes.
And especially along the line of the old Brahmaputra.
Absolutely. But also the access from the Ganges. And of course, I mean, I could construct an argument that says, for example, the Taj Mahal was probably paid for out of money that came from here.